reading Surah Al-Baqarah, and it resolved the whole Trinity issue for me. It put the Trinity in perspective in a way that just resolved it. I felt such an overwhelming peace and calm, and I didn't want to give that away. My name is Heather Laird, and I am a psychotherapist. Yes, so I started my education at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, and I studied in Near Eastern Studies, Islamic Studies, and Arabic, and I double majored in political science. And then that was my undergraduate degree, and then I moved on to my first master's degree in Michigan and studied my Master's of Public Administration and Nonprofit Management. And then I moved to California and studied marriage and family therapy at the Chicago School for my master's degree, and then my doctorate of psychology and marriage and family therapy from there as well. Well, it actually is not, it's not a long, elaborate story either. I had been searching for answers to, I was raised as both in the Catholic Church and in the Protestant Church or the Methodist Church. My father's side of the family were Catholic and my mother's side were Protestant. And I had, as I grew older, I had questions about the Trinity concept. And I would ask the clergy about that question, about the questions I had. The main piece of it that I had trouble digesting, if you will, was how Jesus would be God in the flesh, right? I just had a real issue with that, believing that. And I'm really cautious when I talk about that because I don't like to offend, Christians when I say that. But I did have a real issue with it, and they could never answer my questions to any satisfaction. And so when I was a teenager, like 12, 13, I started searching for answers other places. So I got a text and started reading about Zen Buddhism. I met some Jewish people and started learning about Judaism. And I didn't learn anything about Islam, except that in my humanities class, my sophomore year in high school, we had a textbook that described people from the Middle East as backward, uneducated. I mean, it was really awful. And the attitudes of the people, at least in my immediate surroundings, were very similar. So I was really discouraged from learning anything about Islam at that time. And I had also been a tennis player. So I had been playing in tournaments over the summer. I mean, I was a serious tennis player. And that sophomore year of my high school, I was offered a opportunity to study Arabic in a program on the East Coast. I want to say it was like either New Hampshire or Vermont. And the idea was that you would study Arabic one summer, and then the next summer you'd go to Egypt and actually practice the language. But I didn't have time to do that with doing the tournaments. And so what I decided to do instead was continue to play tennis, but then it put a idea in my head. Because when I started college, I was still really focused on playing tennis, and I wasn't really sure about what I wanted to do for a career. I had thought about being a lawyer. I had thought about, I don't know, a lot of different things, maybe working for the FBI or the CIA. Because I came out of a child of the 80s, right, where we had Rambo and, all these patriotic movies, and it kind of, inspires you to do something like that, right? And I looked into that, but at the same time I was taking classes in Near Studies, and I took a Quran class. And during my Quran class, we were reading Surah Al-Baqarah, and it resolved the whole Trinity issue for me. It put the Trinity in perspective in a way that just resolved it. I felt such an overwhelming peace and calm, and I didn't want to give that away. And so I had an Arabic tutor at the time who I said, the other coincidental thing that happened was that my first roommate was Malaysian. And Malaysians have this beautiful expression of Islam where it's just kind of like part of their life. There's not, you don't feel this sort of repression or hung up like thing about their practice of Islam. And so my roommate at the time had taken off her hijab when she came to the States because she didn't really know why she was wearing it, which actually turned out to be a perfect meeting for me because I was wearing tennis skirts and not much, like, a lot of my flesh was available, showing. And so her journey happened to meet mine at the right time, because had she been fully covered and everything at that time, I think it would have probably turned me off from learning from her. But because she also was going through a journey, and it's kind of interesting because we think oftentimes that people should be perfect, but they're not, right? And their imperfections sometimes can be very perfect for other people. Because of her checking out why she was wearing her hijab, it allowed me to learn. She would get up every morning and pray, so she was praying Fajr every day, and it would annoy me because it's like, who gets up this early? But alhamdulillah, she was a blessed soul, and showed me a very natural way of doing things. And the dorm that I lived in was an international living learning center. So the purpose of the dorm was to expose others to other cultures. And there were a lot of Malaysians there. So I learned, in terms of cultural Islam, I learned a bit from the Malaysians first. After I became Muslim, now my Arabic tutor was also Arab. So I asked, it was a man, I asked him, how do I become Muslim? And I think it was a little bit more ceremonial than it usually is, maybe. But the Malaysians gave me an outfit to wear, and it was challenging for them because I'm a little taller than most of them. But they gave me an outfit to wear. We went to the mosque. I took the shahada in front of the president of the mosque, and it was kind of this sort of formal thing, which is funny because now I know it's not that formal, right? But they made it an experience for me, and then made a feast of Malaysian food, which I didn't realize how spicy that was at the time. But alhamdulillah, that's how I came to Islam, and I hadn't really met the community. Now, one of the things that I did before becoming Muslim was to fast the month of Ramadan. So I wanted to see if I could actually do what was being asked of me. And it was shortly after the month of Ramadan. It was in May, I think, and I became Muslim after the month of Ramadan. Does Islam address the issue of mental health? Well, I think so, right? There are many ways to look at this question. Certainly we have writings from people like Imam al-Ghazali and others who have written around it, and toward issues of the mind and the health. But we also have, without even going to the scholars, right? We have the parables in Quran of the different prophets and their lives, right? And if we look at each one of those prophetic stories, we find mental health issues going on, or familial issues, relational issues. In the United States, mental health is defined in a much broader umbrella than the UK, for example. So we had a delegation come to LA from the UK to discuss mental health. And when we had that exchange, we discovered that we actually have two different ways of viewing mental health. In the UK, typically, and hopefully I'm not wrong, but what they had told us, from the delegation was that mental illness is seen more as like the sort of what we would call the hardcore mental illness of bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and the like, right? Whereas in America, we have a broader umbrella of mental health that includes not only that, but also any relational issues. So marital issues, family issues that are more systemic in nature. And so given that, I think that the prophetic stories work really well within that paradigm, because we can see the journey that a lot of the prophets took and how that affected decision making, how it affected their own mental health, how they handled it by turning to Allah and holding onto that rope of Allah. Yeah. So we have it from many different sources, right? I think curiosity is a good place to start, right? Whenever you have difficulty, a good place to start is curiosity. Be curious about one another. Well, why? And not like, why are you doing this? Right? More like, I wonder why they made that decision. I wonder why they're thinking this way. And if you can start from that place of, so I think curiosity is important. And when you can approach a question or a problem from curiosity and ask why, why is this person doing this? What they might be thinking when they made this decision or did this thing, allows you to take a step back and kind of depersonalize what's happened. Because oftentimes, it's the people that we care about the most that can really affect us. And it's hard for us to detach personally from that. But if we can just try to remain curious and ask those questions, and it allows us to have compassion for one another. We might not agree, but at least we can understand. And then from a place of awareness and understanding, we have a place to go, as opposed to becoming very black and white in our thinking. That doesn't leave us a lot of places to go. There are a lot of things to consider, right? I mean, the Prophet, Salatu Wasalam, he gave us guidelines for what we could choose, right? Beauty, wealth, knowledge, but religiosity, but and I think those are the first things to consider, but also familiarity with each other is really important, right? So if you decide that you would like to marry someone, I advise people to have premarital counseling so that they can raise their awareness of each other, so that they know what potentially might become an issue down the line, so that they can not prevent every issue, because that's not going to happen, but learn how to communicate with each other so that when issues do come up, they have a way of working them out. That's really what's missing for a lot of people, is that they never had those conversations before they got married. People don't have to be perfect, though, before they get married. So even somebody who has a mental health challenge, let's say a personality disorder or something that is like schizophrenia or bipolar, that doesn't mean they're not marriageable. It means that you need to be aware of what is required to make things work. And everybody's going to have challenges. You, me, we all have challenges. The question is, do we understand each other enough to be able to work through those challenges? And if you find somebody who's pleasing to your eye and who you think you could look at for 40 or 50 years, that's a good start. And then after that, learning how to communicate with each other so that, like I said, when you have those difficulties, you can find a way through them. And being aware, like one of the things that we do with premarital counseling here is to look at the generations of your family, right? So we try to look at least 3 generations on both sides of the marriage so that you can trace your relational patterns through your family, because theoretically we can do that up to 10 generations if you have the information. Most people don't. But we can typically get around 3 generations, and we can see things that are going to come down the line. And we can even tell why you probably chose the mate you did. I think, just like within all relationships, I would ask them to listen more and talk less. Each child is a little human being, a little adult coming into being, and they have their own individual identity from a very young age. From about the age of 3, we start developing our own identity. So paying attention to that, nurturing that, being open to who they are and allowing for that to happen will produce the healthiest relationships. In order to do that, we have to listen. Absolutely, and the reason why I would say absolutely is because when we look at the Eid prayers and we look at Jummah prayer, we're seeing an absence of the youth. And what I believe that comes from is a lack of inspiration and understanding, again, of how to connect, why it's meaningful to them. Why should I pray? Why should I be here? And that has not been communicated well and in such a way that they understand that this is a part of their everyday life. How can it be utilized in their everyday life? That connection has not been made, and therefore they're seeking connection in other ways. So you have people on social media, connecting through gaming is popular, right? Because even though it's not real connection, it is a sense of connection, a semblance of connection that they're not getting for whatever reason in their masajid. One of the things I've actually recommended to our own shura is that every masajid have child development classes, because the premarital, pre-parent people can benefit, the parents themselves can benefit, grandparents can benefit, because oftentimes when you take that class, you learn about things you never knew about before, even if you've had children. So it really benefits the whole community for everybody to understand the phases of development, so that we can nurture that individual within the communal environment as they go through those stages. For people in the United States, I think a must-read is Islam and the Black American. Sister Noha Al-Shagari and Munira Lakovic, they created a book called Positive Parenting, and that's based on the theory of positive parenting. And that's certainly one way to go, and a lot of people like that book. Favorite movie of all time? I like Pride and Prejudice. There was a sister in our community, her name was Baina Muhammad. She created a sort of vagina monologues of Muslim women, and that was a great play. I was inspired by Malcolm X myself. I also found Muhammad Ali to be so inspiring. And the thing I really liked about Muhammad Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, was that in some ways he was like an ordinary person, but with extraordinary something, right? He wasn't afraid to just talk to the people on the street. He was very generous with whatever he had, and his wealth wasn't really made out of wealth. I mean, he did, I guess, accumulate wealth over time, and at times he didn't have anything, but because his wealth was really in his character and in his spirit, and he really exhibited Toba. He wasn't afraid to say, okay, yes, I made a mistake and I made Toba. And that's really missing in our communities now. Like, people forget about Toba and they think that we all have to be perfect, and we just don't. we are a people who sin and we get back up and we keep going. We're a resilient people. We've lost that, I think, in a lot of communities, lost sight of it. But those two, and then more contemporarily, I feel like I've been super blessed to have a cadre of people that have inspired me, right? So although there's an age difference here, you know, the American Muslim scholars that I have known since I was 20 until now have been able to spend some time with, and I feel so blessed to have done. I mean, like Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah, Sheikh Hamza, Imam Zaid, Dr. Jackson. All of these people have really informed me as a person, and I'm so grateful to have been able to breathe the same air, you know, and feel their life spirit, because they're amazing people. Martin Lings, Italian. Wow, I guess YouTube. Chai, I've never even drank. Well, I've had coffee before, but I don't drink coffee. The one surah that I read frequently is Asr, right? I recited that all through childbirth, and you know, I use it all of the time, because it reminds us to be patient, right? And it reminds us to be patient in a way that's not just waiting, but holding it down, like, you know, being like the armadillo and, you know, ducking down while the cars pass so we don't get smashed, you know, and then moving forward.